you for being here today. I'm Terry Hughes, President and CEO of the Center for Nonprofit Management. And I want to welcome everyone here today to this presentation of CNM's 2021 Nonprofit Economic Impact Study. We are honored to have Mayor John Cooper here with us today, and we look forward to hearing from Mayor Cooper in just a couple moments. We're extremely proud to partner on this project with the Nashville Area Chamber of Commerce. The Chamber, led by Ralph Schultz, who served on the CNM board for many years, the Chamber has been a steadfast supporter of the nonprofit community. The Chamber's Research Center conducted this impact study, and we have been especially appreciative of their thoroughness and their attention to detail. Today, we have a distinguished panel who will come to the stage in just a moment to share their thoughts about the findings of our study. And we're very appreciative to have David Plazas, Director of Opinion and Engagement at the Tennessean, to serve as the moderator of our panel. So a couple quick housekeeping notes for today. This session is being recorded and it's being shared live on the Chamber's Facebook page, where you can also view closed captioning. And for any media representatives, we're so glad you're here. And we would ask that you hold your questions until after the event during the press availability. Now, before we get started, I would like to ask everyone to stop and think for a moment about a nonprofit business, because they are all businesses, and how that business gets started. Very much like a for-profit business, someone has an idea. They bring in other people to figure out how it will work, how to sustain it, and then they go to work creating it, just like any business. But there's a difference. Their goal is not just to create revenue, although that is important. Their goal is to solve problems, and not just their problems, our problems, the community's problems. Nonprofits are a gift to all of us. A gift from people who are motivated to help others, and that's something we can all celebrate every day. Our organization, the Center for Nonprofit Management, exists to amplify the impact of nonprofits and their partners. So we get to see the brilliance of the sector on a daily basis. But we can lose sight of just how big this sector is, how many nonprofits we have in Middle Tennessee, and how successful they are. Well, there's also something else we can lose sight of, and that's how challenging it is to be a nonprofit. I guess like any business, nonprofits are always at risk. Our mission today is to not only celebrate nonprofits, but to give our community a better understanding of just how big, and how successful, and how resourceful, and yes, how challenged our nonprofit community has become. Nonprofits are a major force in our economy. One of the best aspects of being a nonprofit in Nashville is the great working relationship we have with the public sector, and specifically with the Office of Mayor John Cooper. We're extremely lucky to have a mayor who understands and appreciates the role of nonprofits in our community, and we are proud that he is with us today. Please help me welcome Mayor John Cooper.
Well, thank you, Terry. And I want to thank you for your leadership of the Center of Nonprofit Management. I'm thrilled to just share a few words, and then I have to slip out to a funeral, but I'm going to ask Courtney Pogue, Nashville's new Economic Development Director, to sit in on the rest of the meeting. But Terry, I want to give you a special thanks. You were a force of nature at the Library Foundation, and that's another well-loved part of our city, and now you're bringing the same energy and passion to Nashville's nonprofit sector. And that's another part of our community that makes Nashville strong. And then I always want to thank Ralph Schultz and the Chamber for helping to shine a spotlight on Nashville's nonprofits and community organizations. And let us just all think, where would we be without them? And where would we have been without them all this past year when the EF3 tornado did a horrific tap dance across the city? You all were there. And when the global pandemic arrived in Nashville and people were hurting and in need, you responded. And when a violent blast hit 2nd Avenue on Christmas Day, you all said, how can we help? So it's the nonprofits that call Nashville home, our donors and our volunteers. That's what's making our city strong. And you remind us all of what we stand for. We stand for caring and neighborliness, being good neighbors, and goodwill. And you every day remind us of what's important to building a community and a commitment to serving the community. And your passion has been contagious. Now in 2015, about 350,000 people gave 42.5 million hours of service in the Nashville region. That's one of every 4 adults volunteering for a total time of 3 weeks. That's incredible. But in the past 6 years, Nashville has gone from 34th place to number 16 for its volunteerism compared to other major American cities. Today, 1 out of every 3 adults volunteers. And in this tough year, we really have to depend on that. And we're grateful for everybody's energy and commitment. And going from 1 in 4 volunteers to 1 in 3 volunteers, that's a giant step. But Nashville is a city on the rise, and a city on the rise has to work for everybody. And you are getting that done. 8 in 10 local nonprofits saw an increase in demand for services this past year. So we have to pay attention to the needs that exist and to the people who need us. And as we head into this rebound, and you can feel it out there in Nashville every day, we need to seize the moment to be a city on the rise and to do the hard work to get the moment right for our children and grandchildren. And the people on this call are central to that success. So, and thank you, Terry. Let me turn it back over to you and to Ralph. And again, I'm grateful for Courtney joining our office here, and just bless each of you for helping make Nashville's community stronger. Thank you.
Mayor, thanks for your presence here. You really do underscore the importance of this, and we really appreciate the time that you've given us to be a part of this reveal. So thanks again. The Chamber and the Research Center were pleased to partner with the Center for Nonprofit Management on this important study. We want to thank CNM for making this work possible, especially Terry Hughes, Megan O'Rourke, and David Fox, the entire CNM board and staff for their dedication, support, persistence, and patience in undertaking this work for the nonprofit community. Just like to add a personal note, when I was at the Adventure Science Center, Center for Nonprofit Management was an indispensable partner as we tried to amplify our impact in the community. It's an indispensable resource to nonprofits in this community, and it's a treasure that we all appreciate every day. But the nonprofit sector plays a critical role in the Nashville regional economy. Many of our nonprofit leaders are in the audience today. Welcome and thank you for your attendance. Your organizations not only improve the well-being of our community, you create jobs and contribute to the economy in significant ways. Very importantly, you fill vacuums and provide opportunities for citizens to address issues of passionate interest to them and provide vital needs and fulfill vital needs to the community that wouldn't be fulfilled any other way. And while nonprofits account for a small percentage of private sector firms, they do have a substantial impact on employment, wages, and overall GDP of our economy. We know that our region benefits from the cultivation and support of this essential industry. So before we go into the report findings, here's some background on the data. Our research center used the most up-to-date data available from public wage and employment databases, as well as specific public nonprofit databases. This was supplemented by primary data gathered through a survey to Middle Tennessee nonprofits conducted in the spring of 2020. So here are some of the top line economic findings. First of all, you can see on the screen 1,110 501c3 nonprofit establishments in the Nashville MSA equaled 2.3% of private sector firms. This number does not include 501c6 organizations or worship. It's 501c3 organizations. As you can see, more than 70,000 people are directly employed by nonprofits, and that's 8.7% of all private sector employment. And that represents an incredible $4 billion in wages, or 9.1% of all private sector wages. Big impact. 14.4 billion, or 11.7% of the MSA's overall GDP is in the nonprofit arena. On this slide, you see the breakdown of nonprofit sector by size, segments, and scope, showing total private sector establishments and employees compared with the nonprofit share in that category. Then the total employment-based economic impact of 501c3 nonprofits is 24.6 billion for the MSA. Again, very significant numbers for a very important component of our economy. As the mayor mentioned, we've also seen a growth in volunteerism, a positive attribute of our region. You know, Nashville is often mentioned and rates as one of the friendliest places in the nation. Visitors and others often comment on it. But the great thing about that friendliness is that friendliness converts to action through volunteerism. Nearly 347,000 volunteers served 42.5 million hours of service in 2015, which is the equivalent to more than 20,000 full-time employees, representing 1.1 billion in wages just from those volunteers. An important statistic for the nonprofit community, 50.4% of the residents in the Nashville region make charitable contributions of $25 or more annually. And among those who volunteer, 82.3% donate as well. So look at our survey data on this slide. Here are the respondents broken down by primary service area. These are the people that responded to the survey, and the highest percentage of response at 22% are social and human resource or human service organizations, followed by children and youth, health, education, and arts and culture. So when compared to the effects of the 2009 recession, and we know that Nashville has the characteristic of bouncing back quick from downturns, 57% of the organizations reported increased demand for services in 2009, compared with 78% who reported an expected increase in the demand for services today. That's what, nearly a 20%, or it's a 20% increase. The data also shows that more organizations today expect their revenue to increase, 38% today compared to 14% who saw their revenue increase in 2009. So these are just some of the high-level findings of the study. For those of you interested in the breakdown by service area, the report goes into much more detail. And while the study captures data showing nonprofits are an essential contributor within the regional economy with nearly $25 billion in economic impact, we cannot calculate the impact on each life that's been served and each opportunity provided, each vacuum filled, and each need met that wouldn't have been met any other way. Nonprofits are economic engines that bolster regional and local economies. And while they're formed to benefit the public interest, they are also important drivers of leadership and hope within the community. Again, Terry, thanks for the opportunity to partner and share this important information. Now I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Ralph. We've loved working with you and your team at the Chamber. So, and looking at these numbers, it's incredible to realize that more than 70,000 people are employed by nonprofits in Middle Tennessee. $4 billion in wages and $14.4 billion contributed to our region's gross domestic product. This is a very important part of our regional economy. And now we're going to dive deeper into the substance of this report and what it means for us as we look to the future of our community. So let me note that as we're talking, if you have questions, I already see some of you doing this, you can send them to the chat for our Q&A at the end of the event, and some of them may be able to be answered in the chat. So keep it going. And to lead us in this discussion, I'm so pleased to have someone who has emerged as a real community leader when it comes to facing our challenges with courage and openness. Please join me in welcoming the Tennessean's Director of Opinion and Engagement, David Plazas. He will introduce our panelists. Thank you, David. Welcome.
Terry, thank you so much for this opportunity to be here with you all. And I'm extremely impressed with the work and the leadership from you and also CNM. And in fact, I was thinking about you all about a year ago. You convened a group of hundreds of nonprofit leaders together when COVID-19 had just recently emerged. And there was so much uncertainty and there was a lot of fear about what was going to happen. And this was an extremely productive discussion where people laid out their fears, but also they laid out their hopes. And not too long afterwards, Terry was one of my first guests for the Tennessee Voices podcast, which was an innovation that was done during this time that featured, among other things, the work of nonprofit leaders like her, the work of people like Ralph Schultz and many, many others. So I'm so pleased to join you today. And at this time, I'd like the panelists to turn on their video. I'm going to introduce them all and we're going to get into the Q&A. So our panelists are Mary Jo Wiggins, Finance Deputy Director at Metropolitan Government of Nashville and Davidson County. She's a former CFO and CEO at United Way. We have Bill Rutherford, Executive Vice President and Chief Financial Officer at HCA. We have Charlene Oliver, co-founder and co-executive director of the Equity Alliance. Renata Soto, Senior Fellow at Harvard University and founder of Mosaic Changemakers. And last but not least, Kate Burke, Chief Operating Officer at Alliance Bernstein. We're going to be spending 10 minutes with each of the panelists on a variety of questions, and we'll start with Mary Jo Wiggins. Mary Jo, how are you doing today?
Myself. Good. Sorry, a little unmute there. I'm great. Happy to be here today.
Absolutely. I'm so pleased to have you. And the first question we have for you is, when nonprofits have difficulty obtaining government funding, the organizations and those they have served are impacted. Can you share with us some ideas you have on how nonprofits and government agencies work together to serve the public more effectively?
Yeah, absolutely. And this might sound a little basic, but even in the time that I've been here at Metro, I have seen some challenges for nonprofits obtaining their funding. And some of it's pretty basic. And I think most do a great job with this, but make sure all your housekeeping is in order. Make sure that you're filing your Form 990 timely, that you've got your state solicitation permits and audits. I think having an audit is really one of those barriers that a lot think are expensive, and they don't have to be expensive. Before I was in the nonprofit world, I was an auditor for 10 years. So I've done them, and they're valuable. They really do allow you to not only work with a government and they're required, but other grantors, as there are plenty on this in this conversation to confirm that. Be aware of reporting requirements and timing and the content required in those reports. The government contracts can be a lot more specific than maybe just a general grant that you're used to getting, and be able to measure your outcomes. These are all pretty basic for nonprofits, but we do see folks stumble here at Metro. So it's important to just kind of reiterate that. And you've heard me talk about contract. And maybe that's the one thing that I wanted to highlight when we talk about working effectively is, while they look like a grant for a government, it really is more of a subcontract. It's really a contract to provide services that the government would otherwise be providing. So that's really where it gets to be effective, is when that mission is completely aligned. There are thousands of nonprofits, in Middle Tennessee. And of course, here we're focused on the ones in Davidson County that we provide funding to. but it's not a general grant. It really is a contract for service. And I think once those missions are really aligned, and that you really understand maybe the metro department that you can serve, once you get to that specific level, there's a lot more effectiveness in delivering that service.
Thank you. Our next question is, to advance their mission, nonprofit organizations must influence public opinion and political leadership. What steps can nonprofit leaders take by reaching out to politicians, bureaucrats, and community stakeholders, leading to win-win solutions for both sectors?
Yes, there are definitely win-win, but I'm going to turn the table a little bit on that question to say, before you reach out to your local politicians and leadership and our council members, is to really understand the metro departments. I'm going to go back to kind of what I was saying about aligning that mission. A lot of the nonprofits that I have worked with while I've been here at Metro have come through our administrative and what most folks kind of know if you've worked with Metro is direct appropriations, within our budget. Those dollars are about $3 to $4 million annually, and there is a very distinct process. But it wasn't very long ago, we actually did a survey looking at all of the contracts with nonprofits, and it's in the tens of millions. Most recently, when we did that, it was near $50 million. Now, we haven't done that survey in recent years, but the numbers are probably pretty similar. And what I mean by that is back to that idea of contracts for services. And that's where you really want to know where you're aligned with some of our different departments. Our health department does a lot of work in behavioral health, mental health, and there are so many good nonprofits that are providing those services. So if you, instead of it being more about how can Metro fund your program, how can you serve Metro's programs? It's a little bit of a reverse, but I promise it's a win-win, because these nonprofits are the experts, and we don't need to build up that expertise when we can contract with those experts. So our Office of Family Safety, if you're familiar with their work, they do some really critical work in the areas of domestic violence and child abuse. And again, they contract with nonprofits to provide those services. Social Services, provides sheltering and has a large contract with a nonprofit providing our sheltering services. You're hearing a lot about affordable housing, and for anybody at our most recent council meeting, there was actually legislation passed to work with smaller nonprofits within our affordable housing. So specifically the Barnes Fund, that 20% of the funds allocated through the Barnes Fund would now be appropriated to smaller nonprofits. And I believe the definition of smaller was 4 million or less. So that's where we get those larger numbers in the tens of millions, where we are reliant on the nonprofits and that we really do need them to provide the services. But I would say that rather than taking a great program that you think fits and contacting local leaders and council members to advocate for that program, take the time to actually do the research. When I got to Metro, was amazed. Everything is on our website. You can go to every department, and it's pretty easy to find each department, and you can find their mission. You can find out their leaders. You can find out their programs. And through that, you can really see if there's that alignment. And once you know that you have that alignment, talk to that department. Find out their process. Find out who they are using as vendors. Are nonprofits. And once you know that, that is a much easier path to partnering with Metro government than really, it's kind of that push-pull. So I would say understand what Metro needs subcontracted. And if you are the right vendor, then that is going to be a great fit as a nonprofit.
Thank you. And just a reminder for the audience to place questions in the chat. And we do have one question for you here in the chat. What are some emerging factors that will influence nonprofit and government relationships beyond the pandemic?
So when we talk about beyond the pandemic, we have this, time frame where we're also going to be accessing some of our American Rescue Plan funds. So as we talk about recovery, the pandemic isn't going to be over with a light switch. It's really going to be a ramp up to what some want to call back to normal. That's going to take years. And so as we're working through that, what does the relationship with nonprofits look like post-pandemic? We're going to have this time frame where we're going to be relying on our nonprofits to really help the city recover. And the American Rescue Plan provides funds that for cities, so Metro is a recipient of direct funding that we want to invest back into the community. And that may be in the area of small businesses. And we have nonprofits that are serving small businesses. It's individuals, different, financial assistance, housing, food, rent, and a lot of different affordable housing. We've got, other needs that we put under recovery. So think of recovery as our theme in the very, near future and coming years that our nonprofits really need to be helping us. And I can't leave out the behavioral, health is going to just be critical.
Thank you very much. And I'm curious about your perspective as someone who had worked in the nonprofit sector for so long. What were the things that you came in? What were your expectations? Maybe some of the things that were myths, the things that you learned coming into government, and the things you were able to offer government because you had that experience in nonprofits?
Yeah, I think it's this idea of that alignment because I'm personally aware of so many good programs and, just not the nonprofit itself, but something really specific that you think, oh, this matters, Metro should want to invest in it. But Metro's also often looking at a bigger picture. So we don't want to sprinkle. It's very much the same that we want to be able to go deep. We want to be able to go to root causes. And so that's where a lot of that's kind of why I kind of alluded to that alignment of the mission and the programs and the services. We shouldn't really be seen as a donor, as a funder, because that's not really our role, but we absolutely need nonprofits to help to provide the services. So I think the interesting perspective of kind of taking a view from the other side of the fence was how can we identify where there's that alignment, and we have to really be able to measure it. As a private citizen, we can give money because it feels good, and we know that we just know in our hearts it's doing good work. As Metro government and using taxpayer dollars, we don't have that luxury of making just that gift that feels good. These really aren't gifts. They really are contracts for services that need to be provided to our citizens.
Mary Jo Wiggins from Metro, thank you very much for your time. And now we'll turn it over to Bill Rutherford from HCA.
Good afternoon, David. How are you?
Doing well, thank you, Bill. And you?
Great. Good to be with you.
Well, thank you. Our first question for you is, since 2012, over 100,000 jobs were added to the Middle Tennessee nonprofit sector. As our region grows and recovers, how do you see the demand for corporate philanthropy evolving?
Well, I think we all know corporate philanthropy has been an important part of the landscape of Middle Tennessee for many years. I know for HCA Healthcare, we've been part of Middle Tennessee for over 50 years, and it's embedded in our culture. And I know corporate giving is embedded in the culture of most, if not every, corporation within Middle Tennessee. And it's why we have, I think, the thriving numbers that the impact report had indicated. But clearly, with the growth of the nonprofit sector that the impact report highlighted, there will continue to be opportunities and needs for the corporate enterprises and corporate sector, and the support of the corporate areas will undoubtedly increase. And that will occur not only from existing companies, but we've been so fortunate to see a growth of obviously new companies coming to Middle Tennessee. And we see many of those companies, adopting the culture that we have in Middle Tennessee and making an immediate impact, and those are companies Alliance Bernstein and Amazon, and we're sure Oracle will have. So I think that's really an exciting time as we have these non-for-profit and corporation kind of supported and partnership activity. I think what we think will continue to be important is a community conversation and coordination across multiple sectors that we can, leverage the corporate giving across Middle Tennessee to really help address, key issues that our community is facing, like education, mental health that Mary Jo talked about, affordable housing, food security, and continuing doing this with a lens with equality and access. So it's a really exciting time. And I think the corporation and the corporate giving is an important part of the Middle Tennessee landscape. And I think that opportunity will continue to increase as the needs and the growth of our community occurs.
No, thank you, Bill. Our next question is this. Throughout the pandemic, we have seen some organizations take on risk by pivoting their services and programs in new and innovative ways. In comparison, other organizations have shied away from change and risk in hopes that their operations will soon return to normal. How has HCA guided nonprofits to encourage change through open lines of communication and transparency?
Well, I think we all know every organization has had to shift or adjust in some manner based on the experiences over the past 14 to 15 months. It's been more dramatic for some than it has been for others. At HCA, we're really focused on making a positive community impact through leadership, through service, and through financial support. We have over 200 of our Nashville colleagues that serve in a board capacity or a leadership capacity across the nonprofit community. And so we can participate in advising and guiding through those leadership positions that we have throughout Middle Tennessee. I think that's really important. Through our HCA Foundation and through our other efforts, what we're really trying to do is listen to the needs of the non-for-profit sector and understand, challenges they're having and bring the resources that we have to help solve those issues and to be a part of that, bring our expertise, bring our financial resources, bring our HR and our leadership to support that. And I think we have a pretty good track record to do that as many organizations across Middle Tennessee. An example of that during the COVID years, we hosted some forums, these Connect forums where we tried to listen to what the needs of the non-for-profit and bring really practical solutions, whether it be how to navigate the PPP loan process. We brought some of our medical epidemiologists together so that they could hear from the medical experts about, how the pandemic and the disease was unfolding, about, making access to our HR professionals, about how, different techniques or tactics to work through the various, HR challenges that every organization was challenged with and the like. So our position, like I think many others, is to listen to the needs, bring the vast resources we have available to us, and bring practical solutions to the table versus try to shape any specific agenda. Another thing we did during 2020 through the foundation, pivoted a little bit with our grants, rather than maybe that were specific program grants around an objective. We made a lot of general grants, knowing that non-for-profits needed really just general operating funds to be able to give them run rate to operate and security. So, those were some very specific things that we've done, that we've, I think, accomplished. So just being part of the community, listening to it, and have various opportunities to plug in and really finding what the current needs are. And I think, we have a track record of doing that. Many corporations across Middle Tennessee have the ability to do that. We use this adage, learn, serve, lead, and give. And so I think that's, a good kind of outline that we try to lead by example through that.
Thank you. And you're getting a lot of props for HCA here in the chat. One question I have for you, had mentioned this about the adapting to the culture. HCA has been around for 50 years in this, but Nashville has grown so much in the last decade even. How do you instill or teach or engage people in that culture who may not be familiar with how things work here?
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, I joined HCA about 34 years ago as a young person right out of college, and immediately we have opportunities to volunteer and participate. We have community engagement and community sponsorship. It's just embedded as part of it. We actually give incentives to our employees to participate. We give them time off to volunteer. We have many people know, we have our, community sponsorship programs. We have financial incentives for board representation and the like. So, I think it's throughout all the organization. We pride ourselves in leading by examples. It's part of us. It's founded by our founders, Dr. Frist and their team. So we're fortunate that we've got that long legacy and examples to follow on. But we also, as a leadership team, provide incentives for people to do that. And we try to make it easy for people to participate in whatever their individual calling is, whether it be education or affordable housing or supporting our youth, is providing multiple opportunities, again, to learn. And we have education seminars that we have to serve, various opportunities, whether it be in a junior capacity or a senior capacity, and then try to encourage the appropriate level of giving. And so, again, I think many companies do similar, but it's really embedded in our culture. And I really think it's maybe a Middle Tennessee thing. I think it is embedded in most of the companies that we have, that we're fortunate to have in our community. And it's really been cool to see the new companies coming to Tennessee, establishing. They're coming out of the ground and participating and making significant impact. So we're very pleased and blessed to have that. We're also pleased to have a lot of organizations that support that. We've historically had United Way that's been a way to kind of leverage that. The Chamber's been an important part of that with their Partnership 2020 programs and looking at, their next generation of a Partnership 2030, identifying, what are the needs of our community and coming up with, action plans and activities and engaging the public, private, and the governmental agencies together to solve common issues. So I really think that's something that we're very fortunate to live in this community, to have that. We clearly have needs, and we need to make sure that those needs are available to everyone, and we clearly have been heightened of recent to focus on equality and equity and access. And we've got a really, strong community to be able to do that. And the corporate community coupled with the nonprofit community, coupled with the governmental resources we have, I think we're very fortunate to be able to tackle that, even though we continue to have challenges, but we're in good position in my view on that.
We have a comment here. The HCA Connect expertise was invaluable and timely. Thank you from Gilda's Club.
Well, thank you for that.
So one of the things I wanted to ask you as we get to the end of our segment with you is about education. And HCA has been a leader in supporting public education in town. It certainly makes up about 40% of the city budget. And there are many children who lack resources. When you go out and make the case for supporting public education, how do you round up the different leaders, community leaders, and other activists to get people really supporting and really helping the children?
Well, we do it in participation with others. I mean, I think we all would agree that having a core education and the strength of our public education in particular is foundational for us to attract businesses, to, solve some of the challenges we have. So, we participate with others. We're participating in the pencil program historically, supporting metro schools, supporting the academy focus that's been there, the kind of the specialized academies. So it's really just a calling for us that we think it's just a critical foundational to having a vibrant community in there. So we try to find ways to lead, and we try to find ways to participate in supporting public education in particular and specific educational needs where we see those opportunities present.
Well, Bill Rutherford of HCA, thank you so much again.
Thank you, Dan.
And now I'd like to invite Charlene Oliver of the Equity Alliance to join me, please. How are you doing today, Charlene?
I'm doing good, David. Good to see you.
So it's such a pleasure to see you as well. The first question for you is, what role can nonprofits and philanthropy play in supporting systemic change in the economy, and how can they avoid buttressing the status quo?
So I have a lot of thoughts on this, and I did take notes, so bear with me. But I think first we need to understand how nonprofits and philanthropists wouldn't actually be needed if we had government policies that were designed to really be equitable for and give fair access and opportunity to everyone. And right now, we just know through history that these policies that we continue to enact on the federal, state, and local level don't do service to a lot of our communities of color. So we are having to use nonprofits as an industry as a whole to fill the gaps that our government is failing to step up to the plate and do. So that's my first sort of totality thought on how we can, what's wrong with sort of the systemic change that we need in our economy. And then I think speaking specifically to nonprofits, we need to embrace innovation and systems redesign and simply just not doing things the way we've always done it. Because if we think about the nonprofit industrial complex, you can Google that, it's a thing. It is rooted in white supremacy, unfortunately. And so doing things the way we always done it supports white supremacy. And so as the Equity Alliance, we are building a nonprofit as we speak. And we're trying to do things a little differently and really looking outside the box. And how do we want to build an organization, one, where it's a great place to work, but two, doesn't reinforce those concepts that we're also trying to fight against, right? One, understanding cultural norms is really important for nonprofits. We need to really understand that the way that certain communities go about things is sometimes a cultural norm, and we need to understand that that's just how they do it. For Black folks, we're very relational creatures, and sometimes we're late. We may not always start the board meeting on time, unfortunately. So it's a little bit of those sorts of things we need to really be comfortable with. For us as an organization, we only have 9 board members. I see a lot of nonprofits have these big, large, boards with 25 people and 50 people, and it's like, why? Why do we need that many people? And so it's just getting to the question of why are we doing it this way? So I challenge them in that we pay everyone on our staff, down to our interns, $15 an hour. No one gets paid less than $15 an hour, just because we believe in living out our values that people should be paid a livable wage. Even in the nonprofit industry, we should be able to pay people what we can and what we're worth. We don't always get to do that because of budget constraints, but we should be able to at least set the baseline. And then salary should be transparent. We put all of our salaries on our job postings, and so that also should contribute to a transparent working environment. We do unlimited PTO in our organization. So when we're talking about an economy, we want our nonprofits to be a great place to work, and we're trying to walk that out, right? Even in the holidays that we observe, Juneteenth is a holiday that we observe, so is Indigenous Peoples Day. These are things that we can sort of shift and pivot as nonprofits to make sure that we're not just perpetuating harm to people, and also being inclusive to the populations that we're serving. And also being intentional about, we are intentional about doing business with Black-owned businesses. As nonprofits, we are contracting out our services as vendors and making sure that you are being equitable in who you do business with. When we have board meetings and board retreats, are you contracting with Black consultants? Are you contracting with Black caterers? And I'm not Black, but Latino and immigrant and other sort of communities of color. Are you being inclusive in how you are spending your nonprofit dollars? And then, we gotta continue to not confuse partnership with pushing an agenda. We like to float around that word partnership when we want to partner with other organizations and nonprofits, but are you really? Or are you really just perpetuating an organization when it just do all the work and you get the credit? Because a lot of times Black-led organizations get erased, our work gets erased because we're included in nonprofit grant proposals, but we don't see a percentage of that grant money but we're asked to do all of the work through partnership. And so we got to be cognizant of how we're showing up in partnership with folks. And let's see, what else? When it comes to philanthropy, I definitely want to speak specifically to sort of the giving and donor community. We do have to let go of the white savior God complex that we have. And I see it, unfortunately, a lot in Nashville. We have some really great nonprofits here in Nashville that serve underserved and marginalized communities. But unfortunately, we get into this sort of mindset that because I'm helping, I'm giving my dollars, I am the one that can save this community. And that's just not how it works. Unfortunately, communities of color, BIPOC communities don't necessarily need saving. What we need is accomplices that can help us get out of the problems that we're in. And what I often also see is investing in trauma. For me, I have my own set of traumas that I bring into this work, but you won't necessarily see me wearing that on my sleeve. But unfortunately, I'm not going to sort of do the dog and pony show dance for funders and philanthropists to talk about my trauma and relive that. What I want is an investment. And so we got to be careful about not funding the trauma, but funding equitable solutions. When I think about gun violence and homelessness and affordable housing, let's make sure we're funding the root causes and not the symptoms that show up in the work. Also, when it comes to philanthropy, fund organizations that are challenging systems. We can't talk about direct service nonprofits who are focused on, charity and those things, but we also need to focus on organizations that are focusing on justice and dismantling systemic oppression. We have to do both. We definitely need organizations that are meeting those immediate needs for people, whether it's food, clothing, housing, but we also need to be attacking the systemic root causes that require people to come to your nonprofit in the first place, to need a food box, to need a place to stay, and those sorts of things. And then for philanthropy, consider multi-year grants. As nonprofit startups, unfortunately, we can't do nothing with $10,000. We can't pay people with just $10,000 grants. Consider multi-year grants where you are funding an organization year over year. That gives them the breathing room to plan, to strategize, to come up with better solutions that they're not having to chase dollars and spend all of their time writing grant proposals and fundraising. They can actually be focused on the mission and the work when they know that multi-year funding is going to be there in that cushion. So consider that. Consider unrestricted general operating grants. I think Bill mentioned that earlier. That goes a long way. Look, as donors, I think you mean well, you're well-intentioned, and you think you know the solution to the problem, but trust the practitioners that are doing this work day to day. Just give them the dollars, and they know how best to use those resources if you make it unrestricted. And I'm speaking from experience. And then lastly, and this just might be a personal thing, but philanthropy, please stop making grant proposals so difficult to apply for. One thing I appreciate through the pandemic that I saw a lot of funders do was sort of do away with the grant proposal, and they just gave the money, because we're already out here trying to serve people's needs through a pandemic. We're having to lay people off. We're having to do virtual learning, all these things. The last thing we need to focus on is trying to jump through hoops and hurdles to apply for funding and those sorts of things. So those are things to consider from the person who is giving the dollars and funding our work. And reporting, yes, someone put reporting too. Let's just not make it so burdensome on the people who are out here on the front lines doing this work every day. So those are things to consider when we're talking about dismantling systemic change, being the solution, and being a part of a systemic change, and not doing things the way we've always done it.
Charlene, that was an amazingly comprehensive answer, actually, to both questions I was going to ask you, and we may return after the Q&A to this. But Charlene Oliver of the Equity Alliance, thank you so much for your time. And I'd like to ask Renata Soto to please join me now.
I'm here, thank you. Although I don't know that I will have anything to add after Charlene.
Well, Renata Soto, Mosaic Changemakers, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, thank you. Gracias.
you. So you founded Conexión Américas after the 2001 recession and Mosaic Changemakers during the pandemic. What insights could you share in launching a nonprofit during challenging times?
Well, I think that one thing that I appreciate about this conversation from the beginning and as exemplified to what Charlene just shared is I think often we don't appreciate the nonprofit sector as a innovative sector where we are solving problems over time and where we also have the eye on the future in the communities that we want to build. And so, of course, it is not surprising that often some things are born out of community junctures, economic difficulties, social movements that are disrupting the way in which we understand the world that it is and the ones that we want to build. So in the case of Conexión Américas, of course, it was founded at a time when our community was changing demographically, economically. There was a boom where big infrastructure projects were being developed in Nashville, and we needed a labor force that arrived. And so a growing community demographically in the US for the first time, as you know, that 2000 census was the one that showed that for the first time, even though it's still in concrete numbers, California and Texas and others still have the largest number of Latino communities. It was the 2000 census that showed us that it was places like Nashville and other places in the Southeast that were seeing the highest growth of the Latino population. And so it is not crazy to think, and actually it makes sense to think that that's exactly the context in which Conexión Américas was born. And to me, just like evidenced by the story of Charlene, nonprofit founders in particular are precisely at that juncture of having the pulse of what's happening in our community, maybe even before the rest of the community knows is happening, right? A nonprofit that succeeds, it was mentioned, right? Like it's ideators, innovators, is because it's an idea that came about at the right time with the right people. It is not different than other business that is gonna succeed, right? Like you have to be attending to a need or an opportunity. And I think that also what is important about this recognition of when are we born in the circumstances that bring us about is that nonprofits often are also filling that gap that either private businesses don't fill or create, and that also government is not the best one to meet that need in the community. And so Mary Jo spoke about all these contracts, right? Like it is true that a lot of the nonprofit organizations exist precisely because we are the ones that are performing an essential function that we are supported to do because we as a community understand that needs to be done. But in the same way, sometimes nonprofit organizations exist precisely because governments and the private sector are not the way. And I'm thinking of the case, I know that we are probably thinking about social issues for the most part, or civic engagement, but I'm thinking about the story of the Belcourt Theater, right? Like I also want to talk about the importance of the arts as an important part within the nonprofit sector. The Belcourt Theater is a nonprofit that brings us stories that we can't go and find at Regal or other commercial venues, right? And it took a community when that organization almost disappeared of film lovers and people who understand the power of stories and the things that film can teach us and challenge us. It took a group of funders and volunteers and people committed to seeing that the Belcourt was an important institution that needed to be saved. And it didn't make business sense in the traditional way, right? It was also not going to make sense as a government-run thing. It became a nonprofit organization, and I know I'm sure many people in the audience are now the only one who is so thankful, and is one of the things that to me makes Nashville special. And so I think we need to understand, and I'm excited that this conversation is showing, in the nonprofit world, we're overworked and undervalued in so many ways. And we are often seen as, a group of do-gooders right? Like, oh, you know, doing good for the community, but we're seldom recognized for the sophistication of the businesses that we create, the employment force that we mean, as evidenced by the numbers that Ralph shared earlier. And so I think it's important to recognize that Mosaic Changemakers and Conexión Americas are evidence of two things that happen precisely because our community, we saw a need even before others might, and that it's what we hope makes them not only stick, but also makes them impactful.
Thank you for that. And with Conexión and with Mosaic Changemakers, you've supported the critical work of developing leaders of color. Can you talk about how those efforts have evolved in Nashville during these recent years?
Well, you know, I think in the last few months, probably like more than ever before, we have heard of both in Nashville and nationally, bringing to the forefront the issue of elevating leaders of color, Black leaders, not only for what they do, but the organizations they run and the vision of the community that they are taking us to. And so I think that, to me, what has changed in the last few years, there are things that have not changed. I think you can look at the most traditional leadership development programs in Nashville, or the networks where leaders of Nashville are gathering, or the ones that you aspire to be invited to. You can still see, without doing too much math, that, let's say, particular for Latino leaders, there is a very small representation. There's almost like a low quota, right? Like that, as long as you have a couple token people, you know, hey, it's recognition that our community has changed. Well, I think that people like Charlene and I basically got tired of waiting for those invitations to come to our community in ways that are meaningful. And even though we're going to continue to make sure that our voices are invited and heard in those circles, we also understood that we needed to create other places where our leadership is nurtured, is appreciated, and is supported. And I think that, to me, one of the most important things that has happened in the last few years is that it's precisely to leaders of color, in particularly Black leaders, and particularly Black women leaders, that we are changing a lot of conversations about, like, even the language. Okay, can we just stop talking about charity? Like, I do not like that word. And I know that actually that describes still the way in which sometimes the relationships with funders and grantees, it happens, and describes pretty well that sort of top-down approach that we have inherited from all the years of this country and philanthropy. So I think that is thanks to Black leaders, Black women leaders, and other leaders of color that we're changing the conversation from charity to justice. We are not trying to pick up a check that is going to help us do one little thing. We are really imagining the communities that our children deserve. And that means that we have to question not only how we do the work, but our relationship with the people that support our work, as Charlene best said, and I'm not gonna expand on that. I also think that it's thanks to leaders of color that we have been talking or have been sort of expanding everyone's understanding of talking about from impact to equity, right? Like there is a focus on measuring things in numbers, and absolutely I'm the first one to be all for accountability and how do we demonstrate to the community that we belong to, right? We're a public benefit that belongs to the community, not to the people that work in that organization. So all for accountability in a way that helps us measure, not just for someone else's, but for our own benefit. Are we really achieving the change that we are saying we want to achieve? But I think that there is a danger in focusing on numbers. Like our boards are made out of a lot of people who come from the business community, and that is amazing perspective and expertise that is provided. But it also often means that business leaders apply to nonprofits, like this 3 month, Wall Street quarterly results that you want to see every quarter or every year. And social change doesn't happen that way, right? And so I think that I'm excited to see how leaders of color in the last few years have really pushed notions of not just impact, but equity and change, not just short-term outcomes. And last, I would say that to me, and maybe part of what inspired Mosaic Changemakers, is also the leaders of color and Black leaders in particular have been leading the way in changing the conversation from health to healing, right? To my point, like I know my nonprofit sisters and brothers, like we are overworked and undervalued, as I said earlier. And I do feel that it's not just about the things that we want to change in the world, but like even the own people in this sector. And so I think that it's important to recognize that it's work that is hard because it's long-term. Often you don't even see or you won't see all the fruits of your labor. And I think it's very important to recognize, and I'm glad that hopefully this report today brings attention to how invaluable and the importance of workers in the nonprofit sector are. We need to challenge ourselves to pay better, to extend to the nonprofit sector the benefits that we expect from others, so that we not only have lives that are high on purpose, but that, you know, we can think about retirement in a way that valued our contribution to the communities that we belong to, just as an example. Let me leave it there. But I would say, let me just finish with this thing of the most important thing I think that to me is changing is that we are seeing communities of color as recipients of charity, to seeing communities of color as actually the places of innovation, the places where the creativity and the solutions for the most entrenched social problems that we're trying to face. And that we are not just actually recipients, we are the creators of that Nashville that we all aspire to be a part of.
Renata Soto of Mosaic Changemakers, thank you so much. I'd like to turn now to Kate Burke of Alliance Bernstein, please. Kate, how are you doing today?
Hi, David. I'm very well, thank you. And thank you for including me in this wonderful discussion so far around nonprofits and the impact that they have on their communities.
Absolutely, so glad to have you. And the first question for you is, Alliance Bernstein was intentional about encouraging your leaders to serve on nonprofit boards and was very successful with your market entry into Nashville. Tell us about the vital relationship between AB and the nonprofit sector. Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. You know, first of all, I do think it's important to recognize in some of the comments already made, I think that there is a deep appreciation for how the nonprofits, and particularly in Nashville, how the nonprofits have really served their communities and have a vital role in making long-term change. It was one of the elements that and that cooperation between businesses and nonprofits in creating alliances to solve some of the more difficult challenges the city faces, as well as supporting the wonderful and thriving arts and music scene that's here, that really does require the cooperation across multiple parties to get to that results. So you know, we have a deep appreciation for what nonprofits do, and our people have always had a strong alliance to them, both from a volunteering perspective and something that AB has always had a focus on. Also, many nonprofits are our clients, and so it's part of our mission to help these organizations fulfill their missions and deliver those better outcomes based on what they're hoping to achieve within the communities or the areas they serve. So again, whether it's the arts, you know, like the Nashville Symphony or any of the music organizations, to housing, homelessness, education, there's so many nonprofits out there that are contributing to the broader community and society. And so for AB, when we came and looked at Nashville, we recognized that there was an incredible civic orientation from the businesses and the local and government and local community leaders to continue to evolve Nashville and create a community in which everyone can live and thrive. And that felt very attuned to our own visions of the world. And we were excited about being able to enter Nashville and lend our voice as newcomers, recognizing we had a lot to learn from the community we were entering, how we could be of help. And so it was that in mind that we talked to our, that we said to our local leadership and to the organization more broadly, get involved in your local communities and get involved on boards and help and volunteering. We have historically had a very strong day of service program, which helps our busy employees find organizations that are aligned with missions that are important to them. So whether it's the climate, helping climate, or local gardens and communities, to homelessness, to food banks, providing them those opportunities to get exposed to the organizations, and giving them, similar to HCA, those volunteer hours and the commitment of dollars of AB to help support those endeavors was part of it. And then again, coming here, getting local leaders, getting our leaders to learn about the local community, being involved in nonprofits is a great way to understand the challenges and the opportunities to continue to evolve the city. And so it's been something that our employees have really embraced. I think, have over 40 leaders currently. We're serving currently over on 40 nonprofit boards across multiple organizations. Rock the Street, Wall Street, which I'm a board member of, to the Nashville Symphony, and Thistle Farms, Junior Achievement. Like, everyone has found places that they want to contribute back to their communities. And then organizationally, when we think of what AB does, well, it is research and financial literacy. And so we've been very engaged around the education initiatives in Middle Tennessee. It was important to us as a new employer, and recognizing that there is a need to continue to prepare a strong future workforce and talent pipeline, that investing in education initiatives and programs was going to be a place where we could add value. And so whether it's with the Nashville Public Library Foundation or the United Way, we've tried, or Martha O'Brien Center, we've tried to support those organizations. Particularly, you've seen over the course of the pandemic, the needs continue to grow in our underserved communities. And so how can we help lend our resources and our knowledge where it can be leveraged in a way that's beneficial to the communities, versus coming in with any predetermined solution intact. I think it's really important to work with the local leadership and organizations to come up with solutions. And then how can we be helpful in our role in that?
Thank you very much. And before we move on to the next question, just a reminder to put your questions in the chat, and we'll be asking after the segment with Kate. So the next question for you is, as a financial research firm, what is your take on the economic impact of the nonprofit sector?
Well, look, the research done by the Center for Nonprofit Management and the Chamber clearly shows a very strong role that the nonprofit sector plays in Nashville. It's certainly multifaceted and crucial to the overall economic development in Middle Tennessee. It certainly supports local job development and enables the community to invest in things like education, and again, which in our mind is critical in terms of the long-term longevity of Nashville. And the economic impact is real, but I think it goes beyond just the dollars you're measuring, the wages that are given, and the services being provided. When you think of all of the volunteering that happens in these organizations and the skill sets being leveraged by those volunteers to help those organizations deliver as much as they can. That's not always captured in the research numbers in terms of those volunteering hours. You have also, oftentimes, the volunteers often become those who help become your best donors or help create that donor circle to, again, give the dollars needed by these organizations to be put to use in the way they best see it. So it really can help create this virtuous cycle, I would say, or circle of businesses, nonprofits, and the community, and the people in the community working together to help serve it. And that culture of volunteerism, I think, has a tremendous amount of economic value that, again, is captured within the community when done well.
Well, thank you very much. And one of the things that I wanted to ask you, just to build on one of the questions that we asked for Bill, had to do with adapting to a culture. Bill had mentioned that you have 50 years of being involved in a culture of philanthropy. Coming here to Nashville, maybe is relatively new. What does that mean to you, and how do you find that that you create that relationship?
Look, the most important part of creating those new relationships is listening to the community. It's getting involved and being somewhat humble in the role that we can play in the beginning, because we certainly, as newcomers into the city, are coming on the heels of businesses like HCA and others who have contributed so much to Nashville overall, and has helped the city continue to grow and thrive. And so it's to take this opportunity to get involved in it. That's why we really encouraged AB employees and our leadership team to get involved in local organizations, so that we understand even more so the community that we're operating in and how we can be helpful in forging solutions, or where our insights can be leveraged. And so we follow in the paths of many others who have been successful in Nashville in terms of creating that great civic mindedness. And we came into the city knowing that was really well culturally aligned, and that we should lean into that and take advantage, take that opportunity to listen to those who know the city and try to help where we can.
Okay, Burke of AllianceBernstein, I want to thank you so much for your time. And now it's the portion for public Q&A. So please put in your questions. And actually, our first question, we can either have Terry or Ralph answer it. And it's a little bit long, but I'll read it through because it is a thoughtful question. The question is, I'm not convinced that measuring the economic impacts of nonprofits is very important and may distract them from their work. Nonprofits exist for public benefit and to provide social and environmental services and advocacy. Their economic impacts, while interesting and maybe necessary data for some, are secondary to their social, human welfare, environmental contributions. So two-part question. How do we ensure nonprofits advance and sustain their social and environmental goals, outcomes, impacts? And number two, are we willing to support nonprofits that ask the hard questions facing our city and that can make us uncomfortable? Terry, would you like to take that question?
Hold on, there we go. We forget how to unmute and turn on our videos at the most inopportune moments. This question comes from my friend, John Sherman. And thank you, John. Always very thoughtful. And yeah, I don't know if it's distracting. I think this information is important. It shows the breadth and depth of the sector, but we've heard from some of our panelists that maybe wouldn't it be better if we didn't need the sector? I thought that Charlene was kind of right. Charlene was on target there when she mentioned that if we were all, working ourselves out of a job, that would be a cool thing. But I love your questions. And to me, they are the most important questions. How do we ensure nonprofits advance and sustain their social and environmental goals, outcomes, and impacts? I would take all the rest of the time and probably not have the answer if I tried to answer that question. But I mean, that is an essential question and what we're all about. And what I've just heard it so much in the rich answers from our panelists today, that we're all thinking along those directions, that it is important that we remain healthy and strong in order to help solve the big challenges. And then secondly, are we willing to support nonprofits that ask the hard questions facing our city and that can make us uncomfortable? I don't know. I'm going to ask the 167 people on this call. Are we willing? I'm willing, and I want to work with you guys to do that. But I think we have a ways to go. So that's my answer. Ralph, do you have anything to say to that?
I think you gave a great answer. I would say that I think that more and more individual contributors, donors, corporate donors, et cetera, are willing to support organizations that ask the tough questions. I think they're, by and large, they want to improve the community. So I think that they're willing to have those conversations, but they are looking for solution orientations too. They're looking for, they want to make an investment in what will make a difference in altering the path of those difficult questions or those difficult issues. So I think there is a higher level of willingness to consider those tougher issues now. I think we've seen that in the last 6 months or so.
Can I add something there, David? I think that it would be interesting to Ralph and Terry's maybe a challenge to your partnership, maybe in a couple of years to, I know John Sherman is challenging, is this data important? But let's actually challenge you to think about, there is national research that talks about the disparities in funding for organizations led by people of color, which often or certainly recently are the ones that are asking the tough questions, right? Are the ones that are both putting the mirror to our community and to ourselves. And so it would be interesting to see, I would love to see data of funding in Middle Tennessee, in Nashville, percentage of funding that goes to organizations led by people of color who are primarily serving communities of color who are asking the tough questions.
Do any other panelists have anything to say about this particular question?
Hey, David, this is Charlene. I can't start my video for some reason, but I did want to chime in and just echo what Renata said. And there is a stat, and it was put in the Black Women's Roundtable report a few years ago that stated only 3% of Black women-led organizations receive national investment, philanthropy investment. And so that is telling. I think there was a key finding in there that said in the economic study that said only 30% of organizations saw revenue growth, so that serve underserved populations. So that trend kind of supports that logic that folks that are organizations that are led by people of color don't get the investment that we see over time. And I think that does need to change. Unfortunately, those are the organizations that are going to stand up and ask the difficult questions and make us uncomfortable, unfortunately. Unfortunately, that is Washington, unfortunately. Fortunately, the Equity Alliance does that pretty well. And folks who rock with us will, and those who don't, unfortunately, don't. So I will say that that is a thing. We do need to look at more data in the disparities of funding and invest more in BIPOC-led organizations.
Thank you very much, Charlene. One of the themes that was brought up during this discussion is about return on investment, applying a business metric to nonprofits, yet this has been challenged. And maybe if we could direct us to either Bill or Kate, as a business, would you be open to changing the way you look at ROI, looking at sustainable long-term social changes has been discussed here?
I'm happy to say a little bit about that. I don't think that those are necessarily not related. Here, let me start my video, sorry. The ROI, when we think of ROI as an investment firm, we often don't look at a one-year return cycle. We look at it over multiple years of programming, or in our world of our investments, and what's those return on those investments on a 1, 3, 5, 10-year basis. And so the idea that a nonprofit is being asked to provide outcome orientation about what they're looking to achieve doesn't necessarily have to be measured in 1 year. It can be measured in the 1, 3, 5, 10-year, 20-year timeframe in terms of the impact that they have within their communities, and how that can evolve and change over time based on the circumstances within the community changing. So it's not necessarily a static outcome that people are looking to invest in. But I do think it's important when you're seeking out dollars to be able to articulate what that vision is and what that return is that you hope to provide to that community. And it doesn't necessarily have to be in pure numbers, because I think the point is made, some of it is qualitative, not quantitative in terms of outcomes. You know, how do you measure the impact on someone's life in a number is difficult to do. And so there has to be an openness as well about understanding as the donor, what is the broader mission in which you're contributing to, and how do you balance both the qualitative and the quantitative returns that you're seeking out in terms of making sure you're making the right. There's many nonprofits out there. You have to have some input into how you're choosing to give those dollars, and looking at outcomes or proposed outcomes is one way of understanding what those dollars are going to be put to use.
Thank you. Does anybody else on the panel wish to take this question?
No, I would just echo, this is Bill, what was said, that, you know, I think returns are one factor, but, you know, best of my knowledge, we're looking at long-term, you know, impact. And it's not necessarily, it has to be tied to economic impact. We recognize there's many things you're not going to be able to do a pure economic return on its surface, but there should be identifiable objectives that we're in pursuit of accomplishing, and they don't necessarily need to be economic objectives, but to their discussion, they're output-based objectives. So I think most organizations are just looking for, you know, clear objectives that can be at least measured over a period of time. Those just don't have to be pure economic return data. I think most organizations recognize that those are hard to come by. There may be at times we want to get a glimpse into those, but I think long-term pursuit of objectives is what I think donors would be looking for.
Thank you. We have about 5 minutes left on the panel, and I do want to ask this question that came in the chat. And meanwhile, everybody, please take a look at some great links that have been shared by the panelists and by members of the public. The question is this: as we evaluate our events, programs, or organizations, it is essential to ask what barriers might keep people away. How has the pandemic changed your mindset beyond assuming positive intent is enough to make spaces inclusive? I open up this to the panel. Would anybody like to take this question?
I'll lead off then, I guess. Look, I think it goes back to the mission of the organization, the representation in the organization of people who are involved in the community solving their local community problems. That you need inclusiveness in the discussion. You need that diversity of thought in the room to think through a variety of ways to solve problems. And so we do look at that when we're looking at the organizations in which we support, is to understand, are they being inclusive in their mission, and how broad is that reach? And I think that's an important element. But it really goes back to those who are donating the money to take that on as one of the elements in their evaluation of their programs, of where they're giving their money and what programs they're supporting. Are they supporting an inclusive approach to community engagement and involvement?
Thank you, Kate. Anybody else have any thoughts on this particular question on creating inclusive spaces? Okay, there's another question here. I think we have a little bit of time, which: how are nonprofits supposed to catch data with limited resources and time, especially when they're intangible?
I guess I'll take that. It may be directed to my response. You know, I don't know if I have a great answer, but I am sure there is activity-based data that it may not be able to be outcome that's intangible, you know, if it is intangible, but I think just being able to track some activity would be important. Again, I think each scenario is a little bit different, but I don't think it's reasonable to expect we don't have any way to assess either the activity or the outcomes we're at least in pursuit of achieving. I think every organization, whether it's non-for-profit or not, should be able to, you know, assess their activity, that they're making some progress. It may just be purely activity-based. It may be, how many people did we interact with? How many programs did we support? How many people did we counsel? Whatever the case may be. It may not necessarily be a pure outcome if that's not necessarily readily available, but we should have some ability to measure and assess progress and activity. And I don't think that's that unreasonable of a request to be able to have. So.
Well, thank you very much, Bill. And at this moment, I want to thank all of our panelists for their words. Mary Jo Wiggins, Finance Deputy Director at Metropolitan Government of Nashville, Davidson County. Bill Rutherford, Executive Vice President and Chief Financial Officer at HCA. Charlene Oliver, Co-founder and Co-Executive Director of the Equity Alliance. Renata Soto, Senior Fellow at Harvard University and founder of Mosaic Changemakers, and Kate Burke, Chief Operating Officer at Alliance Bernstein. Thank you for allowing me to moderate this conversation, and I turn it over to Terry again.
All right. Oh, wow. Oh, wow. We just had quite a conversation. That was amazing. Really an amazing session. Thank you all. Thank you to our panelists. David, thank you for moderating. All of you who hung in there with us, thank you so much. I think we're coming away with a great sense of how important nonprofits are to our community, and also how resilient they are, and also how we have a lot of opportunity ahead of us to make our sector more equitable. There's going to be a lot of change that needs to happen. Nonprofits depend on the willingness of people like you and me to support them through our investment of time and money and resources. And you being a part of this today shows how much you care. And so thrilled to see such a great crowd today. Several of our nonprofit partners are on the Zoom, and we hope that you will use this data to continue to support your missions, your fundraising efforts. Everybody can find the executive summary. We have interactive findings, graphs, and all kinds of cool things. And the full report will be on CNM's website. We're dropping a link into the chat right now. We also encourage our nonprofit members and non-members to communicate your needs to us at CNM, because that's how we develop the programming and the kinds of things that we offer. Our latest nonprofit needs assessment survey is currently open through mid-June, and we want your feedback on ways that we can continue to support your work. So you'll receive a link to that in our follow-up email after this event. We are really proud of the success of our nonprofit community, and we look forward to watching these intrepid entrepreneurs continue to solve our community's problems as our region grows. Thank you for joining us today, and have a great evening.